So in this video today we're going to talk about designing a wood project in Google SketchUp 2016 version. This could also be done in several other versions. So to start with, we're going to click on our template and we're going to choose woodworking inches, which will be partways down the page here. Scrolling down, woodworking inches. We could use woodworking millimeters, but since most of our material comes from the lumberyard in inches and feet, that's what we're going to go with. Okay, so when we get started and it gets loaded, you see the space is gray. I like to leave the axes on here as it's kind of a good starting point. Now to start with, we're just going to go with a simple night table project that I've done several years with my IA9 class. So to start with, making a cabinet, we're going to work in this kind of reverse of how you would do it if you're actually building it for this assignment. So we're going to build a giant cube and then work at it as if we're hollowing it out or we're carving it out. Not typically how you would build something this big. So first off, we're going to enter our size, and our size is going to be 19, and we could put the inches symbol in, but we don't have to because our default template is inches. So 19 comma 15 space 3 divided by 4, so 3/4. You could also do 15.75 if you know that that's what the measurements are. Okay, so the next thing then, we're going to zoom on in with our zoom extents. A little bit too close. I'm going to get our push-pull tool now, and we're going to click on that surface, release, drag it vertical. We're going to enter in 20 inches. So we want this to be 20 inches high. It's a shorter night table, so you might want to modify that if you're actually going to build this. Next, we could orbit around. I like to just go to the front view with my views toolbar, and I'm going to zoom extents again so it's up closer. Grab our tape measure tool, T for the shortcut. We're going to use 3/4 inch material for this, so we're going to go down 3/4 of an inch with a guideline from the top down. We're going to repeat that same one in from the side, so 3/4. And what this is doing is laying out where the sides of our table are on the top. Next thing, we're going to have some shelves in here. We're going to have 2 shelves. So the first one's going to have a toe kick underneath. So we're going to go with 2.5 inches up for our toe kick, 2.5 or 2 space 1 divided by 2. And then from that line, we're going to go up another 3/4 of an inch to show our material thickness. And then from that last one, we're going to go 9 inches up again. From that, we're going to show our 3/4 of an inch thick again. Okay, we're going to now go to our isometric view. And back to our front view first. Go to our rectangle tool, and we're going to draw in the spaces where our cabinet holes are going to be, where it's going to be actually carved out. So we're going to draw 3 rectangles from the intersecting points. Now we're going to go to our isometric view. To make this a little bit more clear, we're going to get our push-pull. We're going to click, release, drag our push-pull arrow so that it lines up with the back edge, and that's going to make it completely hollow and disappear. Now, if you're going to use push-pull again, and you have the same measurement, you can simply double-click, and it'll repeat. So we're going to do that for all 3. So there's the shell of our cabinet. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to work on our joinery. And we will have a back on this project, but we're going to leave that till the end, and I'll show you why later on. All right, so next, grab your zoom tool, right-click anywhere on the screen, and choose zoom window. We're going to zoom in on this top right corner, and we're going to start by creating our rabbet joints. So from the bottom of the top, we're going to go up 1/4 of an inch, or 1/3 of the thickness typically is a good rule for making rabbet and dados. And we're going to draw our line with our pencil tool or our line tool all the way across, and then make sure that we go all the way back the side. Now you see that this looks like it's not, when you're on the axes, it looks distorted, but it actually is correct. Trust the color of the axes. Okay, so then we're going to repeat that same thing over on the other side. Get our pencil tool, draw up, draw over, orbit around, get our pencil tool, we're going to go from that point all the way back to that back edge. Next we're going to do is we're going to also go back to my front view to see this better, zoom extents, and we're going to try to zoom in a little bit more on this one side. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to create some dados for our shelves, some dado joints, which we'll make later on with our table saw and some dado blades. We're going to go over 1/4 of an inch, same rule, 1/3 the thickness. Get our pencil tool. We're going to draw in this joint, going across, down, and over. We're going to repeat the same thing, and by using the guidelines, we don't have to draw that in for the next one. We don't have to use the guidelines again. We just have to draw it in with the pencil. Okay, and we're going to go over to the other side. Same thing, 1/4 of an inch over, and draw that in. Now this might not look like a very good joint at this point because our guidelines are skewing it, the view of it a little bit, but when we turn off our guides, you'll see what those joints really look like and how they would work. Okay, now we could go ahead and finish these and do them the same on the back side, but the back's going to get covered up and nobody's going to see the back as long as you understand the basic type of joinery that's going to go on. Okay, so there we go. There's our basic shell. Let's turn off our guide so you can see what that looks like. There's our joinery. Okay. Now, next thing that we're going to do is I want to have no back down at the bottom at the toe kick. We're also going to have no back at the top part here, and the reason I usually don't do that is so that if you have cords for like an alarm clock, if you have, maybe you want to use this as a TV stand instead, or something else where you want to have electronics, you can have that going in there with it open without having to cut a hole. So we could then personalize this, we can paint it, we can add some 3D text to add your name onto it so that you know whose assignment this is if this is what you're doing. We're not going to bother with that. So the next step then that we're going to do today for this is we're just going to paint it. So easiest thing to do is just choose your wood and you can edit. Maybe you don't quite like that. You can go in here, we're going to paint something, and then we can darken it up, we can lighten it, we can go into our color wheel. If there's another thing that we like the color of, we can match it to it if it's in the model. And you notice that I only painted one part of it. Well, if I want this whole thing to be painted, what I want to do is I want to select the whole thing, so I can either draw a box around it, or I could triple click and the whole thing gets selected. And then I'm going to go with my paint bucket again and just paint one and the whole thing gets painted. Okay, now there's a reason why we do this before we dimension. And dimensioning is really important if we're going to build this because we need to know what the measurements are going to be. General rule for dimensioning is that you want to have the least amount of measurements you need to build it. And if you have too many, then it begins to look cluttered. So when you're using the dimensioning tool, and this is one pet peeve of mine with SketchUp, you can see how with the 3D that it doesn't know which direction way to go sometimes. You can try to constrain it on the axes, but easiest honestly is just to play around with it, move your orbit, go back to your tool again, and it should come. So there we go. So we're going to go with 19 inches wide for this project. The total height is pretty important that we know how high it is. So anytime you use a dimensioning tool, you click your start point, your end point, and then drag it away. Now, I'm keeping in mind that when I go to print this, I'm going to print it in an isometric view, like so, and I want to be able to see all of my measurements when I'm printing that, so I don't want them to be obscured by the wood pattern or anything else. So what I'm going to do next is we've shown our length, our width, our height, and our depth. Now, for our basic shape, the next thing that we want to do too is we want to show where our joinery starts. So our toe kick, 2.5 inches up. We could have it there, we could have it out here. I kind of like it right there for this one. We need to show at some point what is the size of our material. And you notice that 3/4 is kind of obscured by the arrows. So if you just right click on it and then change your text position to the outside start, and I'm just going to move that a little more. There we go. You can see that a little bit better. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to dimension our next area. So if we do it this way, we're going to have to do some measurements. We're going to have to do some adding. 2.5 plus 3/4, 3 1/4 plus 9 should be 12 1/4. Or the nice thing about SketchUp is that it does some of that math for you. You can go up here and you can drag it out, and it will also tell you that. Okay. All right. Do we need to show this top one? What's that space there? No, we don't, because if we're marking this out on our wood, we'll know where the location of our shelf already. What that space is up there is just going to be the remainder. Okay, now, next part that we're going to do is we are going to make this whole thing either a group or a component. Since we're not going to be making multiples of these, we're just going to make it a group. If we're going to use this same thing over and over again in the model on SketchUp, then we would want to make it a component. Now, why are we doing that? So that when we make our back for this, we do not make any changes to the actual cabinet itself. So we're going to bring our guides back again, and we're going to draw a guideline right on sorry, a tape measure tool. We're going to draw a tape measure guideline from the top of our middle shelf, our top shelf, I guess you would call that, down to the bottom of our bottom shelf. That's where we want to place our back on. And this thin little 1/4 inch piece is going to be where this project gets most of its strength, because it's going to be the lateral strength that's going to be the most concerned. And if you've ever bought a cheap Walmart or IKEA or cheap piece of furniture from a store, and the backs come loose, they give you little nails to hammer in. Those backs generally come loose, and then that's where it's going to have its problems. So we made a rectangle from corner to corner. Next thing I'm going to do is I get my push-pull tool. I'm going to pull it out 1/4 inch. Because we're using 1/4 inch plywood that we're just going to end up air stapling onto the back of it. And this is going to be a really strong project. We're going to air staple about every 4 inches around it. And that's that. So now we're going to get our select tool, hit spacebar if you want a shortcut. We're going to triple click on it because that's going to select that whole piece. We're going to make that a group. Or we could make it a component, but we don't need to. And then we're going to get our paint tool, and we're going to paint that group. So now there's our finished night table project. If I was going to print this now, I would go to my view, I would turn off my axes now, I would turn off my guides, and then I would go Zoom Extents, File, and I like to do a print preview. So you can go into print, find your printer that you need to print it to, say OK. I like to just have fit to page, use Model Extents. Let's go there, say OK. And there's your basic plan. If you want to get more detailed, you could do some screenshots into a word processing document like a Google Doc or a Microsoft Word. You could do some screenshots of that, place it in different angles maybe if you need to have a closer up of what the dado and rabbet joints look like. But that's the night table.